This is On Diversity, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore. This is the 4th season, and I'm your host, Liang Kaixin, Associate Director of IPS and also a former journalist. Today's episode is in conjunction with IPS's annual flagship conference, Singapore Perspectives 2024, and the theme is on youth and caregiving. We have Dr Tan Poh Lin, IPS Senior Research Fellow, who examines Singapore's family and population through interdisciplinary perspectives. We also have Jason Leow, a youth caregiver of old people and young people at the same time, I would say. Welcome to the podcast today. From what we know, youths are marrying and having children later, and this helps them to have greater financial and psychological resources for raising children. But at the same time, they may have to take care of their parents while they are starting their own families. How might this caregiving sandwich be managed, and what are the opportunities and challenges that they will face? So maybe first of all, Jason, perhaps you can introduce yourself first and tell us more about your family situation.
Yeah, I stay with my parents. So I stay with my wife and my 3-year-old toddler son. And my parents stay with me. So in a 5-room flat, so we are like 3 generations under one roof. And my wife's a stay-home mom. My elderly parents are both retired, active but retired. And I'm self-employed, so very often I work from home, and yeah, that's pretty much my situation.
Okay, it sounds like it's not too bad after all.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, but then since you have to take care of your elderly parents and also a toddler, then what are some challenges that you face?
I think one recent example was during COVID. I think that was the challenging part, because that's what MOH say, that COVID affects the very young and the very old, right? So my son was born, and then 1 month later we went into circuit breaker. So he was still an infant, very vulnerable. My parents were in their 70s, so they are also pretty exposed. So that was a pretty stressful time, trying to juggle both sides, because at some point in time, the entire household caught COVID. I think that was the Omicron phase, really. They caught it first, then we had to isolate, then my child caught it. Basically, at that point in time, I was like, wow, I cannot get it as well, even though everyone else around me is getting it. Because who will go and buy food, for example, right? We all can't leave the house if everyone fell. That was a tough period, trying to take care of both sides. Yeah, and different needs, right? Because infant, they need stimulation, they need to be around. Then, as for my parents, I have to be worried about, would they fall, would they get giddy and fall, or fall in the bathroom and stuff like that. Very different sort of concerns on either sides.
Okay, then Poh Lin, then come to you, because you have published a research paper on the dual burdens of care, right? Sandwich couples in East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. What about Singapore then? What are some similarities in these societies?
So I would say that when it comes to looking at East Asia and Singapore being Chinese majority countries, has some similarities. One of the things that you would see across societies being quite similar is actually the fact that we are all patrilocal societies.
Patrilocal?
That's right. Patrilocal actually just means that elderly parents prefer to stay with or at least near their adult sons rather than their adult daughters. So that means expectations.
That's Jason, all right?
That's right. So when I heard his story, I thought that does fit the picture. So we are patrilocal, and I think that over time, it's gotten less. People are more used to having more equitable distribution of duties across sons and daughters. But it's still the fact that actually sons do tend to give more, especially financially, because men do earn more than women still. So we still have that semblance of patrilocality. That being one aspect. The other aspect that I would like to just touch on here, besides the gender one, is actually the age exchange, intergenerational angle. So we know that oftentimes when we look at sandwich generations, between elderly and adults, caregivers, there's actually some kind of two-way exchange. Right? Adults take care of their elderly parents, but also sometimes elderly parents give help to their adult children. And I think that what characterizes East Asia, right, including Singapore, is that if you look at this kind of relationship between elderly parents and adult children, it's often much more the case that it is the older generation that feels more obliged to the younger generation rather than the other way around. So it's definitely among adult caregivers like Jason, they will feel very heavily obligated to take care of their children. And
More so than their parents?
they also feel obligated to take care of the parents, but oftentimes you will see that their elderly parents feel even more obligated to help their adult children and help their grandchildren.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, we often do focus on the one direction from the middle generation to the elderly, but actually elderly generations often feel a lot of caregiving obligations too. They actually do feel this desire to help their elder children, help their young grandparents. So I would say that this kind of elderly, older generations wishing to help out the younger generation is much more prevalent in our kind of Asian context because of this kind of perhaps high levels of investment that we put in our next generation.
Okay. Then for Jason, then what do you think about this? Do you feel very obliged to take care of your parents? And does your parents also feel very obliged to take care of their grandchildren also?
Yeah, I think I definitely observed that in the household because we live under one roof, right? So that's really one of the, I guess, benefits of staying. I mean, a lot of my peers, people my age, they actually stay separate from their parents, so there's not that close proximity, right? Yeah, but being able to see my son playing with his grandfather and grandmother is very heartwarming sometimes. But I also understand that they also spend time to help us in a way with some caregiving, like, oh, I need to work, or my wife's cooking, and so the son plays with the grandparents for a while. But I think thankfully they also try to have their own social lives. So I think that kind of helps me feel not like they're entirely just helping to take care of my son. Yeah.
So your parents also help to take care of your...
Because we stay in the same household. Oh, dad is busy working, mom's cooking, then he'll just run to the grandparents. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's also another interesting thing about what Poh Lin said about patrilocal, which is what, Jason, you are. Because I think, Jason, I understand that you have an elder sister who's married also, right? Yeah, then that's very interesting. So how do you decide that you are the one with your parents instead of your sister then?
We didn't decide. I mean, it just happened. Elder sister, so she married out. And then I'm the younger one, right? So eventually when it came to my turn to get married and get a house, he was like, well, then where do they stay? So we just decided, okay, just stay together long. Yeah. It wasn't a
Conscious
decision like to be with the son in a sense. Yeah. But having said that, I think my sister also does take a very, Poh Lin, you mentioned about it's a bit more equitable between siblings and something like that. Yeah, my sister also hangs out with my parents quite often, twice a week and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. Poh Lin, then I think you were wanting to talk more about the other similarities, right? You want to continue?
I mean, there's actually more differences than similarities.
Okay,
actually, if you look across the different societies, if you consider, for example, Taiwan and China actually have a huge rural segment. Actually, in Taiwan, for example, they have this rotation system that's very interesting where the parents will stay with one son for a couple of years, then they'll rotate to the next son and so forth. So they take turns hosting their parents. And that's a very kind of a rural arrangement that we
Actually,
don't see.
in Singapore, some people are like that also.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but they rotate around HDB flats, right? Okay.
So what I think in Singapore is very common for people to actually live near
okay.
that. But I think rotation is quite a burden, I would imagine, on the parents because they got to move every couple of years. So there are some differences across society, but I would say that across all societies, you will see that, like Jason already described, it is a two-way relationship and often of a very reciprocal nature. That is to say that you see that actually adult children tend to give more help and also finances to the parents who help them. Whether it is repayment or more of because their relationship has a stronger basis, because they interact more, is two different ways to look at it. But generally, there is a kind of give and take that is reciprocal in nature. But I would say also that if you look at the total burden, and as Jason has described it, I'm interested in hearing from him whether he would say that it is really very different taking care of children and taking care of elderly parents. And if you look at the kind of expenditures on children, it is more like related to enrichment and education. And for elderly, it's related to their health, right? So in a Singaporean context, we have subsidies for both. We have subsidies for preschool, we have subsidies for health, but there are a lot of additional expenses that are not covered. So it is up to the families. If you want to go for very expensive enrichment classes that are supposed to be good for the children,
then maybe we should go to Jason first. Yeah, because we know that there's a lot of expenses from day-to-day expenditure, from groceries and transport, medical bills, and long-term caregiving responsibilities. So does taking care of your parents and your children at the same time put a strain on your finances?
I wouldn't say strain.
Okay.
Because it feels like it shouldn't be, but it's my responsibility, right? They're my parents. They brought me up, so I'm taking care of them right now. I chose to have children. It's my choice. So it feels like it's just what I have to do. But now we have higher expectations of education, of what we can offer to our children. Just like my son's, he attends preschool and every semester is about 2K. Yeah, it's not childcare. It's not like PCF. Yeah, so that's already quite substantial. Then as our quality of life and our expectations are higher, right? Yeah, so it does cost a lot more. And then for parents' side, they belong to a generation where they don't have a lot of MediSave. Well, my mom didn't work, she was stay home. Yeah, my dad didn't have a lot as well, I think because he was a taxi driver. Very often, whatever top up have to come from our own pockets. Yeah, that's like both sides of it.
But Jason, you're quite lucky, right? Because your parents are somewhat quite healthy right now. But would you foresee healthcare expenses going up in the future?
For sure. They are in their 70s. They are still healthy, living very social lives and all. But I can imagine by the 80s, they might need more care, might start going to the hospital more often. So
okay. Yeah, Poh Lin, so what does your research tell you about the sandwich caregivers in Singapore then?
I would say that the first thing to note, I think also when we speak about caring for elderly parents, is that even though it is a burden on caregivers to take care of both children and elderly, the experience is actually quite different. Because actually for some people, taking care of children can be emotionally quite rewarding because you're watching somebody grow up, right? But taking care of elderly is actually different because sometimes it is a decline that you see in a person and the person is sometimes not expected to recover. So sometimes that is an emotional burden on top of the kind of physical and mental strain that is already on the person. So on top of all the financial things we talked about, and top of all the time constraints, now you also have that emotional burden to bear. So in the first place, caring for elderly has its own specific challenges. In terms of the distribution of who takes on this care work, I would say that in general, what we do see is that it is something that often women, and also maybe also reflected in Jason's story, sometimes women are not able to participate in labor market. They actually don't take on full-time work or they don't work at all. And that's because they either are seen as the person who is most suitable for the role of caretaker, or they actually maybe have some kind of decision. They made a decision that this is something that they feel that they should do.
Okay. So Jason, did your wife have to make this decision to give up her work to take care of your parents and your child?
not really for my parents. Yeah, but actually when you describe that situation, it resonated more about what my mom went through. I think her generation, yeah, when she had to take care of more for her mom, my grandmother. Yeah, but for my wife, no, not really. She stay home mainly to take care of the son. My parents can take care of themselves mostly. They're still healthy. So yeah, there isn't that intentional choice to be away from the workforce. In fact, now that he's 3, turning 4, we are already talking about when she can hit back to work already. Yeah, so it actually isn't that bad.
Okay, so Poh Lin, but we also know that in Singapore there are some caregivers who gave up their work and career to look after their children and parents, right? So how does this affect Singapore then?
One clear thing is that, generally speaking, when we talk about caregiving, when we take a look at them through a survey, we do find that the amount of time that women and men spend performing care work is much more on the female side. In terms of how this reflects in the labour market, one thing is that you would see that, as we do see that labour participation rates is always higher for men than for women in general. This not only means that they don't participate as much in the market, but also put perhaps some kind of a ceiling on how far they can advance if they're choosing so-called the caregiving track. Because one thing that you will see is that when people have more care work demands in their personal life, there'll be more demand in the labour market for kind of flexible work. But if people are using this flexible work in order to devote a lot of the time to care work, it's harder for them to advance. And I think that is quite natural. So that is one consequence that we see that is highly gendered in nature. And one other thing is that you sometimes hear surveys talk about how Singaporean workers are quite stressed out. So as this kind of care burdens start to increase in the face of population aging, I think we will continue to see this being a bigger issue in the workplace, where we have burnt out workers who have low mental well-being because they are juggling too many things at the same time. They have often a full-time job, and on top of that, maybe another 20 or 30 hours a week spent doing caregiving. That is like really a lot of time that are spent on duties and obligations and responsibilities, and not a lot of time for yourself.
Okay. Then Jason, because just now you mentioned about COVID, right? Like you were very worried that you cannot fall, right? You have to take care of your parents and your children. Do you have any other circumstances that's similar, or how has this affected your attitudes towards your work and health? Yeah.
Yeah, when Poh Lin mentioned about the emotional stress and all that, can definitely relate. Because someone staying together, right? Every day you're looking out. Like when the kid plays with toys and toy cars are on the floor, and you get a bit anxious, we shouldn't leave it on the floor. Later, the elderly step on it and fall down. So things like that is and I'm working from home, so it's constantly in the background of your mind. You're constantly looking out. So it's not like a suddenly got a illness or some health condition that come out that is very stressful. But it's more like, I don't know, death by 1,000 cuts, that kind of feeling. Not that bad, but yeah, but it's the daily drip of all the little things that you worry about. If my parents take a bit longer in the shower, I might start to think, are they okay? Did they fall? Then I'll listen out, like, are they moving? So it's little things like that I think add to that stress and the emotional weight of caregiving. Yeah, and Poh Lin talking about the decline, definitely can feel that. I find that you often see on TV or sometimes with your other friends, as the adult child taking care of your parent, you start to treat your parent like a child. You start to speak to them like a child, right? But the hard part is trying to not do that. I don't want to treat them like my child. They're my parent. How do I treat them with respect as an adult? Even as I help them manage their health conditions and all that, a lot of that negotiation and how do I work with them in an empowering way rather than trying to just take over everything and make decisions for them for everything and all that. I think that's even harder line to tread in a sense. Yeah.
But you are self-employed and you're working from home, and your wife is a stay-home mother. Then do you have friends around you who are facing this situation, like them being a sandwich caregiver also? What kind of stories do you hear from them?
I think very few that's like me exactly. Because most of my friends, their parents stay separate. Yeah. But similar stories, just taking care, being sandwiched.
Yeah, so Poh Lin, that's very interesting because you mentioned earlier that in China and Taiwan, usually the three generations will stay together, while in Singapore, they live near each other, right? What effect will there be when the parents and the adult children, they don't live so near each other, but is there any implications in caregiving responsibilities?
So in China, there is a kind of a famous phenomenon where because of the rural-urban migration, where because there are many more job opportunities in the cities, where actually the children are left behind in the rural areas, and then the parents would travel to the cities and actually stay there most of the year and go back, for example, for Chinese New Year, then children are brought up basically by their grandparents.
Okay.
And in those circumstances, there is really a big wealth of research on it. But it's really very different from the Singaporean context because we don't really have that much land. People don't travel that far for work where they stay separate. Although I've seen actually several cases where the parents actually stay in a different residence from the grandparents and the children sleep in the grandparents' flat, not in their parents' flat.
Oh, that's me. I was like that. I was brought up by my grandparents. Yeah, but my question was that because our flat sizes are smaller, and usually we don't really have intergenerational families living together, 3 generations, families tend to live away from their parents, right? Does it impact their caregiving duties or responsibilities?
I think for sure, because there is a difference between seeing somebody every day, having meals with somebody every day, and then being separate apart. But I think that many families actually do make arrangements where they exchange care duties. For example, they may ask their parents to help out with childcare. It's pretty common. So in that sense, there will be quite a lot of contact, even if they are living in different residences. In general, I think that if you just talk about adults living together with elderly, what I see in terms of research is that, in fact, living with elderly doesn't really affect adults being in a negative way. So even though we think about it as elderly are dependents, right? Oftentimes when people are just living with their parents, we don't see that the husband and wife have lower well-being life. That's because they actually do also receive help from their elderly parents. In fact, that it is living with children that is the complication, especially for women, because I think when women live with children, what we see in terms of the research is that it leads to lower self-reported satisfaction with life among women. That is not to say that I am saying that having children is not a good thing, because happiness is not the same thing as, for example, joy, because happiness is not based on your current immediate circumstances, whereas joy is more dependent on your inner state. For example, you get a present and it makes you happy, but when you give a present, it gives you joy. And that's what we see with parents. They're basically performing a lot of forms of sacrifice, and that gives them that kind of joy in life. But we do see that also leads to lower life satisfaction among women.
So there was also a survey by Manulife Asia Care Survey, right? Which says that among those who are taking care of sick family members and young kids, the most cited cause of anxiety is the fear of being unable to provide proper care for family members should they, as caregivers, fall ill or die, which is what Jason said just now during COVID. So, Poh Lin, then do we see this happening in Singapore? There's a lot of anxiety happening, or is there greater emotional distress when caregivers have to take care of 2 generations?
I'm actually not able to off the top of my head to tell you what are the exact proportions. Certainly when you do talk to caregivers, that is oftentimes that the concerns are being brought up with regard to how they're going to be able to manage. But in terms of pure statistics, I don't know if I can bring them up off the top of my head.
Okay. Then Jason, then I'll come to you then. Do you feel more stressed about this, and how do you handle the stress from being a caregiver?
Yeah, I don't feel that it's a more stressful situation to be living 3 generations under one. There's pros and cons, just as if you are living without your parents with you and you're just nuclear family, right? There's also stresses because no one else can help you. I also seen friends who struggle with that. If you don't have a helper, it's just you or your wife doing all the caring and cleaning and whatever. Yeah, so both downsides and upsides.
How about finances then? I think we mentioned just now, but do you feel like there's more stress on your finances or more stress on being a sole breadwinner?
For sure, because now one salary has to feed 5 people, right? Yeah, so it's a lot more on me. But maybe that will change soon once my wife is able to head back to work. Yeah, because it's phases, right? Like once the child is a bit more independent, more grown up, then we can explore that option. So maybe it's just temporary. Yeah, I'm not too stressed about it.
Poh Lin, you mentioned about the lower life and marital satisfaction is only among women also, right? My more general question would be like, can support network or causes help young caregivers who are facing burnout?
I definitely would, first of all, mention that when we talk about support for caregivers, you have to accept that even when people receive help, oftentimes you see that they still continue to put in quite a lot of effort and quite a lot of time. And that is because even if you're getting helpers to help you out, there is still that kind of management role. And for some reason, tends to be that the wife or the woman is the one who does this kind of household management role. And when you do this kind of household management role, I think it's especially frustrating, and I'll defer to Jason on this. Even though I myself in my life, actually I do play this role. When you have a multi-generational family, right, as the kind of household manager, you have to negotiate with more adults, members' perspective. You have to get everybody together, and you have to accommodate more views and preferences, and it can be quite a lot of work. The mental load being carried as the manager can, on top of your regular work, can be quite exhausting, and I think that is a big part of it. Now, when it comes to talking about more formally in the workplace, whether you can provide courses and all these type of mentorship programs, I would say that one thing is that caregivers, to me, although you can provide a lot of help, one thing to take note is that they tend to be quite time poor. And we're not surprised by that because we already talked about how they have to do double duty, right? So when you're in this kind of situation, especially when you are facing distress, you may not be motivated to do much in that circumstances, and you may not be focusing on a long-term payoff from investing in yourself. You are more concerned about surviving day to day. So I would say that when we think about all the goodwill towards caregivers, we also have to remember their constraints.
So Poh Lin, I just remembered that you're a working mom also. Do you live with your parents, and are you in the same situation also?
When I was listening to Jason, I was like, well, he's very similar to me because my father was also a taxi driver. My mother also homemaker.
Oh my God, that's exactly the same family situation, yeah.
And my COVID story is also like his because my mother caught it first and had to be isolated. Then after that, without her, it became harder because we were both working at the same time while taking care of our young children who were 1 and 3 at that time. So it was quite challenging. So we are very similar. I could really empathize with what he was saying.
So your parents do stay together at your house also?
My mother only stays with me because my father stays with his own children. He's still taking care of my adult siblings in some sense.
Okay.
He still does the laundry and stuff like that. Yeah.
So your mom stays together with you while you are taking care of your children, and I guess your mom also helps to take care of your children also. Does that work this way?
Yeah, I think that without my mother, the only way I can manage is with a foreign domestic worker.
Okay. Then my question will be directed to you, Poh Lin. How do you manage, right? How do you juggle work and family life at the same time?
Oh, I think that for me, because my mother is a bit younger than Jason's parents, my mother is only in her late 60s. So she's still relatively mobile, and she's a very cheerful, happy person. And so I do worry about her falling down, actually, sometimes. But she's a very big help to me because she's able to, for example, send my children to preschool and pick them up. That is already a very big difference. So I would say that one way that I manage is that I see myself as a net recipient of help right now in my current phase. But I think that the tables will change as she gets older. Then when I'm in my 40s, I do expect that it would be more me doing more care work. The tide would turn. However, at that point, then my children will be older. So I think the generational gap size really matters. If your gap is just nice, actually, you can make it work. But if your gap is too large, or if your parents happen to be unhealthy, then it would be a different story.
Jason, what do you think about this also?
Yeah, I agree. I was mentioning at the beginning, right? If you're very young and very old at the same time, kena COVID, then yeah, but because my parents are still quite healthy, so I'm grateful for that. Yeah, but I can't imagine like if I'm taking care of a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, and then very sick parents who needs to go to the hospital often and all. But that would be doubly stressful, I think. Yeah.
Okay, then to both of you, because you can visualize that this may happen in the near future. So, what are some things that you might have prepared for yourself? Maybe Poh Lin first.
Oh, I am unfortunately in that phase where I'm living day to day. I do think that one thing I try to do now actually is to take them on vacations while they're still very mobile. Because I do foresee that one day they won't be able to go to many places because they're perhaps not able to climb steps anymore. So I do think that now is the time to let them enjoy their life. Yeah.
Okay, Jason?
Yeah, similarly. In fact, we even before kids, we brought them overseas already, so that when they can still walk a lot more. Now harder already. Yeah, same thing. Let's try and do as much as we can with the parents, and then now with a child, I think it's even more fun in a sense, going out together.
Because your parents are retired right now, right? So you are taking care of your parents and your children, but will you be worried about your own retirement in the future?
Yeah, for sure. I think not right now. I don't really plan for retirement, which I know I should. It's like one of those things like, oh yeah, I should invest, I should plan for retirement. When you are taking care of a child, and then there was the pandemic the past 3 years and all that, so it got a bit more immediate day to day. Yeah, but I think as my child gets older, I think that there'll be more space, and then he starts going to school, then there'll be more space to take care of longer term concerns like this.
Then Poh Lin, then what is the implication for sandwich caregivers and their retirement plans?
You mean in general, right?
Yeah, in general.
For the population.
Yeah.
I think that's largely dependent on how we look at the financing of population aging, because there are 3 possible sources. One of them is actually that the elderly have assets that they can tap on. The other one is family resources. And the last one is public resources, which is to say the public sector, the government. And if you look at countries around the world, some are clustered around the public sector. So the government picks up a lot of the pieces. In that sense, then the citizens of those kinds of countries, including European nations, they would have less worry about their retirement adequacy because they themselves, their parents will be taken care of by the state system, and they themselves expect to be in that kind of situation also. But in Singapore, it's more, I would say, divided between the in-kind and the in-cash support. Because if you look at our expenditures on healthcare for elderly, there's actually a lot of subsidies that current generations of elderlies get. So a lot of the kind of medical expenditures are offset by public investments and care facilities, not just medical, but also care facilities. But in terms of the day-to-day expenses that elderly have, these are much more kind of dependent on themselves as well as dependent on what transfers they can get, either from their spouses or from their adult children or family members. So you can see that in surveys, a large proportion of elderly actually will say that they are not financially adequate or they have low levels of financial adequacy. So I think that in this current system, that is perhaps the area that we should be most looking out for, which is the financial aspect.
Okay, so we also can see that there's a shift from family-based care to state-based care, right? Like family members are used to be the primary source of support for their elderly parents.
I would say actually they're not from family care to state-based care, but actually towards self-funded retirement.
Self-funded, okay.
We are moving, if you think about it, as a pyramid, right? With our own savings at the top of a triangle, and then family and state as the 2 bottom other pieces of the triangle, right? Then we are moving up the pyramid is what the trajectory is going. And that makes sense actually, because if you look at our current generations, compared to previous generations, they have benefited from Singapore's development. They are more educated, they have better health, so they are actually better able to amass savings. Moving towards, I think, the future, perhaps we won't see so much of the kind of pioneer generation, or Merdeka generation type of benefits. But rather, each person, as part of labour policy, is one of the goals would be that people are able to save enough for their own retirement.
Jason, any thoughts about this? Saving enough for your own retirement?
That's definitely what I want for myself. Yeah. And because I can also see, like me and most of my peers, we have jobs, we pay MediSave. Over a lifetime, we build up that pot of funds for our health in the old age. So I think, even in fact, for now, for my in-laws, my wife's parents, they are younger, they have planned for retirement, and they are pretty self-sufficient even though they are not really working anymore. They are working part-time and in small things. So it's already going that way, like what Poh Lin was saying, towards self kind of retirement. I think it's also better.
Then I'll move towards the policy suggestions then. For Poh Lin then, how do we help sandwich caregivers who may not be in such a good state? Maybe they don't have that much savings, or maybe they are very stretched in their life with a lot of caregiving responsibilities. Yeah, what are some policy suggestions to help them?
I think if you think broadly about the way that we should approach caregivers, I think that there are three pieces to think about from the big picture. And one of it is to offset kind of the load. So I'll just say three words first. You should offset, you should accommodate, and you should uplift. But offset means that we shift some of the care responsibilities and duties onto lower cost sets of other alternative caregivers. Oftentimes, by lower cost, like in Singapore, for example, we hire quite a lot of foreign domestic workers, right? And that is one piece of that pillar. This helps to build up the surplus in our economy in order to be able to finance things like our medical system, and also to be able to support people in building up their retirement funds. So I think that is one piece of the puzzle. That can often also mean actually tapping on the less educated generation before us, because like lots of our parents have received less education from us. So in some sense, it makes sense for there to be a lot of dynamics going on in terms of intergenerational exchanges. However, I think there is lack of support right now for elderly parents who do choose to help, because they don't really get any form. There's no mechanism to make sure that they do receive financial support if they were to give up their time for care work. At the same time, I think when we think about this kind of offsetting initiatives, we need to acknowledge that even though these are options that alleviate the burden, there's still that management role that I spoke about that they still need to play. So we still need to recognize that despite having options, that being in this situation, caregivers still need consideration of their home responsibilities. Now I'll just talk about accommodation. Sure. Okay, so again, we want to try to make it so that they have as little to simultaneously do in terms of full-time work and home care work. What the workplace can do, I think one thing they can do is to institute more universal kind of care leave, not just for parents, not just for those with elderly, but really make it universal. Because what we don't want is to typify people. Women are caregivers, so let's have special leave only for women. Or because when you give special leave, I think one thing is that you do give rise to social expectations about what they're supposed to do and what they're capable of doing also. So in some sense, making it universal is really important. The other thing is also that nowadays we talk a lot about flexible work arrangements. When you look at flexible work arrangements, there need to become some kind of understanding that is institution specific, so that employees would use the leave very responsibly in order to make the system sustainable. Because if people are abusing the system, even if you call for employers to provide this, it will be obvious that this is not working. So there has to be that kind of understanding. What are flexible work arrangements for? What are you supposed to be doing when you're working from home, and what you're not supposed to be doing? Okay. Yeah. So if I could continue my lecture, I guess it's going to be pretty long, to accommodate. Part, right? That's uplift. Okay. I would just mention that now we have services that are also available via public services, but we should also understand that employers can play their part in providing counseling or services, for example, because stress levels and burnout levels are very significant in Singapore. Yeah, so I think that bring these three pieces together would help to make it so that as Singapore is continuing to age, that we don't collapse under all these new responsibility, that we not only build up our physical infrastructure, but we also tend to our own care infrastructure, which is not as visible, but it's just as important.
Okay. And Jason, then what about you then? How do you think that the government can help to support people like you who has both responsibilities in taking care of your parents and children? Yeah, how can the government help you?
I think whatever that the government is currently doing, it's already pretty good. At least from my impression of it and as a citizen, right? So there's a lot of support, there's a lot of subsidies when it comes to healthcare. My dad's pioneer generation, my mom's Merdeka, so they have a lot of benefits as well. I don't feel like I can or I should ask for more from the government, because I like to be self-sufficient as a more of principle. And I'm not someone who actually government should do this, government should do that. I don't enjoy doing that kind of narrative, in my head at least. But actually I feel like if anything that we need more is, Poh Lin, you talk about care infrastructure. The thought that came to mind when you mentioned that was like the ecosystem of care individuals within our families. So we felt that very acutely during giving birth to our child. Then after that, during the 坐月, the first month and all that.
The confinement, right?
The confinement and everything. We felt, wow, this taking care of an infant feels like a very hard job for two new parents.
Okay.
And sometimes we read stuff about online and all that. Were we really meant to be nuclear families taking care alone? Like, we used to be part of villages and tribes where there's a ecosystem of uncles, aunties, family members, distant, or even not family members, like neighbors who take care and help you out. Everyone took care of each other in that bigger village. But we no longer have that.
Okay.
Me and my wife felt that very acutely, like, where is our support system when it comes to caring for a child? So we felt it was very lacking. We couldn't turn to a lot of people. Thankfully, we had my parents around to take care. But imagine if you're a new mom, your husband goes to work, and you're alone with the child, you don't know what to do, and you have no one else to ask for help. I feel that feels very isolating. And to me, that's transfer over to the sandwich generation also. Nowadays, you don't have a lot of siblings as well, right? Not like my parents' generation, you got seven other siblings to share the burden with. So it feels very isolating. And I often wonder, is there a way we can bring that back, that ecosystem of relationships and care in some way, even though we are no longer... They keep talking about kampong spirit, right?
Where's the kampong?
Where's the kampong? HDB is no longer a kampong already. So how can that happen? I have no answers. I wish we still had a tribe and a village that we can turn to. Very often that seems to be online these days. Yeah, and I don't think this is an area where the government traditionally is very strong at. So maybe this has to be some ground up, community-driven sort of thing. I'm not sure. Yeah, but that's really what I feel. I wish there is, for us, for citizens.
Poh Lin, any thoughts about this? Yeah, I think that maybe just to pipe in on what you were saying, it reminds me of a program I heard, I think from foreign policy, where they would have elderly volunteer to be caregivers of young children. So they are not necessarily their own grandchildren, but there will be a program where retired elderly and young children will mix, and they need not be related to each other. The other thought I had was that a lot of the way that stress on sandwich families may be comes from an issue of trust.
Okay.
Can you trust the former operators of these childcare centers? Can you trust your foreign domestic worker? Because I think that a lot of parents, they choose rather to take care of the children themselves because they are not willing to trust somebody who's not blood related, right? So I think that one thing we have to note is that besides what has already been noted by Jason in what the government is doing, one really big initiative is pushing the quality of our childcare system by improving the places in schools and also investment in the teachers and the principals in the preschool sector, right? That is one move towards trying to increase trust in that sector. But at the same time, I think that we want to build the kind of kampong. I think we need to address the trust issue. And I don't know, Jason, would you be willing to entrust your son to people that are not blood related?
Or how about your elderly parents to a nursing home also, right?
Yeah, like I grew up with going to the neighbor's place, playing together, and then my mom just quite assured there's trust, right? So yeah, now that these days, I guess that trust is a bit more lacking because everyone's closed doors and all that. And a lot of care becomes very centralized, I feel. I wish it can be otherwise, to be honest. But I don't know how that looks like. Recently, I did see a program by, I think, MSF, that you can sign up to be a nanny if you are elderly and you can take care of other non-blood related children. Yeah, I saw it on my lift lobby, those screens that they do like adverts, right? Yeah, apparently you can now. But yeah, I wish that there less government intervene.
Less government intervention?
Yeah, more community driven. Yeah, where you naturally build their relationships among each other, you trust each other. Like recently, we got to know a family from a neighboring block because my child and their child goes to the same preschool. And then sometimes you go over and play. And then now we have established a sort of trust where my wife can go over, let them play, then she comes back, get some stuff, and then goes back again because we trust the family already. Yeah, but how do you scale this? It's a question. Yeah.
But Poh Lin, likewise, when you talk about childcare centres, and what about nursing homes then? Is there a need for more formal caregiving facilities in Singapore?
I think that we have definitely built more up. So you have those kind that are home-based, center-based, for example. We have more kind of types and choices. Places for care has really ballooned up in recent years. But I think that people are less concerned. Maybe I would also differ to what Jason thinks, but I think that people are less concerned because elderly are still adults. They're not children after all. They can tell you unless they're suffering from, they can usually tell you if they're being ill-treated. Whereas children, we think they don't know that how to express themselves. So I think that is the difference between the two. So also elderly are still adults. They can voice their preferences. Oftentimes, unless they have no power really at all over where they're going, they can choose and say, I don't want to do this, I'd rather do that. So I trust that in many circumstances, we feel that there is less of that trust issue where there's silent abuse going on, unless it's a really elderly person. In fact, you would think that maybe that would be a bigger issue with a domestic worker, because then they're perhaps isolated, and there's no witness.
So in conclusion, I think besides government intervention, we were thinking about more ground-up initiatives to see how they can better address issues when families are met with caregiving responsibilities towards their parents and children. In closing, I would like to thank my guests, Dr. Tan Poh Lin and Jason Leow, for their time today. Thank you all for listening in. See you on the next episode of On Diversity. On Diversity is a podcast inspired by the Institute of Policy Studies Managing Diversity's research program. We are available on all major podcast platforms. Please follow or subscribe to get notified when we have a new episode. You can visit our website, ipscommons.sg, for more information.